Hi, I'm Janiessa Norice, and this is Define Design. To quote Forrest Gump, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. When users engage with our products, the goal is to give them a pleasant experience, and that shouldn't be reliant on the user selected task. For example, if a user is trying to unsubscribe, we can't assume it's because they don't like us. It could be the expense of our services. The reality is that content designers aren't responsible for understanding the mental states or backgrounds of the individuals using our products. Our role is simply to provide guidance with direct content. Trauma-informed design extends beyond just unfortunate circumstances. Consider how a user might feel when they face an error state, which can represent sudden change in any product flow and potentially trigger trauma related to their experience. How can we create content that is straightforward while minimizing stress for our users? To gain further insights on this topic, I've consulted with my colleague, Joe Levy. Joe is a senior product manager and content designer at Chin, specializing in trauma-informed digital experiences for survivors of gender-based violence. With over 20 years of experience across design, content, strategy, and product, she's passionate about creating emotionally safe experiences that center accessibility and user well-being. Tune into your insights on writing for people and not personas, meeting users where they are, and so much more. Let's tune in with Jo, a fellow content designer, and she specializes in something quite unique, important, and kind of niche as well. It's trauma-informed design, and it's something that might sound specific, but it kind of impacts us all at one point or another. So, hey, Jo, how are you doing?
Hi, Janiessa. I'm really good. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. So yeah, trauma-informed content design. I think that I don't know, it's coming to the forefront a bit more. I feel like it's a phrase that people are seeing used a lot, but they may not know what it means. And I think that if you don't really know what it means, your instinct is probably to think, well, this is that group of people that's over there, people who have experienced trauma. And that's not me. That's not anybody I know. And I don't need to think about it. But one of the things that I find really interesting about it is that that is not true. And actually, it affects everybody. So I guess the way that you can think about it is like, yes, you've got big T trauma. You've got people who've, had to deal with abuse and kind of, I don't know, like horrific car accidents and really traumatic bereavement. But that's your big T trauma. And actually, everybody at some point in their lives has to deal with some kind of trauma, what you might call little T trauma. And it might be things that it's a moment or it's a particular stage of your life. It may not last very long, but you're going to have to deal with it anyway. And so the thing that I always think is that the kind of what I've heard described as like the 5 most stressful life events, which in no particular order are getting married, getting divorced, moving house, having a baby, bereavement, and I know that's 5. I actually also think that kind of changing jobs can be in there, and the whole thing like getting made redundant. So you can think about these things that can cause like quite a lot of distress and upset. And you think about, even if you're not providing a service that is specifically for people who have been traumatized, you need to bear in mind that people, when they come to use your online service, are not all going to be in this happy, healthy, calm, like perfect mind state. Like they could be trying to order online groceries because they're suddenly having to look after a partner or a parent who has fallen ill or had an accident. And it could just be a totally natural part of life that everybody has to deal with. And the thing about trauma is that when you're in that kind of emotional distress, you're going to find it harder to process information. You're going to find it harder to make decisions. You're going to be more easily overwhelmed. So really, it's about it's not trying to make the thing that's causing the trauma better. Like, we're not responsible for that. We can't do that. But what we can do is make our service, whatever it is that we're providing online, we can make it not make things worse. So we can try and reduce cognitive load. We can not use judgy language. We can have error messages that don't make a person feel like they just failed at life. We can do all these. They're actually just little things that can just still make a massive difference. And it's also the kind of thing that you would appreciate yourself if you're in one of these situations that everybody has to go through at some point in life.
So when it comes in, we have some little T traumas. It kind of makes me think about when you learn about human anatomy, how we have different types of stress. We have good stress and then we have bad stress. Regardless, stress exists. It is what it is. All right. So it's the same thing with trauma. It exists. It is what it is. You may have a big one, you may have a small one, but at some point it's something that may impact you as an individual. And from something that you've mentioned on one of your LinkedIn posts, when writing for people, these aren't personas, they're moments on a person's journey. And I want to dive more into that so you can elaborate a bit on what you mean by that instead of just assuming I have my impression, but I would love to hear your thoughts first to see if I was in alignment or not. And then we can figure it out.
Yeah, that's cool. That's absolutely cool. So I should just make it clear, I'm not saying never use personas, right? I'm not making a blanket statement. And that post was related specifically to a project that I'm currently working on with Chen. We're a charity, and we provide online resources for survivors of gender-based violence. So the thing about that audience is that there are a number of different stages in the journey, and there are, like, Chen has created their own set of trauma-informed design principles. That's been just so interesting to work with, but it's really helped to kind of round out and deepen my approach. But one of those principles is plurality. So it's like you can't flatten the experience of survivors and just put them into neat buckets, because particularly when you're talking about marginalized people, or kind of vulnerable groups, there's a lot of intersecting things going on. So instead, what's better to do is to try and meet survivors where they are, and if they're at a point on the journey. So it may be that they're struggling to put a name to what they're experiencing. It might be that they're dealing with abuse and they're ready to leave. It might be that they're dealing with abuse, but they're really not ready to leave, because sometimes it takes a while to kind of be ready for that. It could be that they're an ally. They want to help a friend. It could be that they've been processing and dealing with past abuse or trauma and they really want to heal. So you can't make these things into personas, but what you can try and do is serve a point on the journey. And I think that can be a really useful way to look at things, particularly when you're dealing with sensitive groups. And it could apply even for services that aren't like directed at people dealing with trauma. It could apply when you're, okay, well, you think about it, it's a bit like jobs to be done. So what is the job that your user is trying to get done? And you're not making them into a persona. You don't necessarily need to know that. You just need to know, are they trying to put this online groceries order through in the quickest and easiest way possible? Are they kind of, what is it they're trying to achieve?
The language that you may want to use for the victim of said abuse may be different for the supporter of the victim of said abuse, for example. And that does make sense. And also knowing where that person is in their stage along those lines, because even if it's something medical, for example, they may be in the beginning of that journey, they may need more support, or they may be near the end and may be willing to give more support. So these things can vary, and I think it's very important to always know exactly where your user is and what your user's goals are. and understanding that you may need to use different types of
Yes.
language depending on what the user's task is and their position, because they may not be the person impacted by the trauma directly. They could be a supporter of that person, or somebody looking to get more insight for a family, whatever, whatever. Or they could be the person impacted. They could be a person that may want to help others that are also impacted. Like there are so many different layers that go into it. So I think that it's
Yeah,
very important to always know
exactly.
like where they are. And
Yeah.
when you were mentioning we're not designing for personas, that's what my thought process was. Because when you draft up a persona, it quickly can become somewhat of a character, and you just kind of relate them to certain things like, well, our user
Yeah.
wouldn't like this because we put that they don't
Yeah.
like that, our user wouldn't do this. And people are not monolithic, so you can't necessarily just say, hey, just because we said Sally doesn't like apples, that means none of our users like apples. That's not very accurate.
Yes. Exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly the word that Chen uses as well. Survivors aren't a monolith. And so I think that definitely applies when you're talking about people
Mhm.
who have dealt with a lot of trauma, whether it's quite the same thing when you're talking about just being trauma aware and trauma informed in case any of your users are going through any distress or not at their best. They could be feeling unwell. They could just be having a really crap day. All of these things have an effect on how we interact with online services. So it's just consideration, and it can be about the language that you use, just in general, trying to be kind of kind and considerate. But it can also be about how you direct people, like how you help them navigate in order to do what they want to do. So in our case, in the Chen project I'm talking about, it's on the homepage, and what we want to do, this hasn't been done yet. So if you go and look at it, it will not do this. But what we want to do is kind of basically, what do you need right now? And then we're trying to show people that we understand where they might be at if they're in this moment, and direct them to our like specific content that
Yeah.
is geared towards that moment, if that kind of makes sense. So, for instance, if they're at the stage where they're ready to heal, we would direct them to our self-healing platform, which is called Bloom, and the point is to help them get what they need more quickly and more efficiently. Yeah.
The user to a point more quickly and efficiently. And being a content designer and managing content that isn't a blanket statement, so to speak, because everyone approaches their traumas in different ways, no matter if they're the big T's or the little T's. Everyone has their different strategies. So when it comes to communicating with these users, what are some ways where we can create content that's informing the users but not overwhelming them?
Yeah. So there's a number of things that you want to take into consideration for this. And it actually, one of the other things that really interests me is the overlaps between trauma
Mhm.
informed content design and accessibility
Mhm.
requirements, because actually very often the same things will apply. For instance, trying to minimize cognitive load, so you're not overwhelming the user with sort of like too many different colors or too much going on a page. You want to make sure that your content is well structured, that you are using your H headings, and that's also things like proper structure, proper formatting of text. It sounds like, oh my God, it's such detail. Why is that
Mhm.
important? Well, first of all, because it makes it easier to read, and we should all be trying to do that. Second of all, it is good SEO hygiene. And even with AI, SEO is still a thing because AI uses the SEO to tell us the stuff. So that makes a difference. But also chunking content so that it's in like bite-sized pieces, progressive disclosure, so that you're only showing people what they need to see, or you're helping to direct them to the bit that they need so they don't have to wade through a load of irrelevant information. But usually, you can also use things like accordions and tabs and this kind of stuff, so that you're showing and hiding, or they can pick the thing that's relevant to them. So those are just a few of the ways. I mean, good writing helps so that you can write well. You're not using 1,000 words when 80 would do, that kind of thing as well. That all makes a difference. It's like they're all it's like communication best practice. So it applies in so many different areas of life, not just content design, not just online products.
Products that may not be specific to trauma related incidents. Like everyone has error states, and honestly, that is a point of trauma.
Absolutely.
It might be a little T, but it is still a point of trauma because for the user, something has gone wrong. All of a sudden, there's been an abrupt change, and we have to communicate with them
Yes.
what has happened and what they can do in order to either reroute, begin again, and what happens next, right? And that's essentially how you're guiding users with trauma specific products. So it's something that we're all impacted by.
Yeah. It's it's not making things worse as well. Like even if it's not a trauma specific product, like what you're saying there with error states, the number of times, oh my gosh, you must find this as well. Like the number of kind of error messages that you see, and you're like, come on, you can do better than this. That doesn't tell me what just happened. It doesn't tell me what's going to happen now. It doesn't tell me what I should do instead. So I've got to work this out for myself. And then think about being somebody who's in emotional distress or major stress, really upset. Like you could actually reduce them to tears. That's a thing that for somebody who feels like that, tears are probably never that far away. And your 10-word error message that just wasn't really thought about properly could do that. And that's so needless. Like just a bit of consideration, like we can all be nicer.
Yes, it would be awesome if the world were just a little bit more considerate. Thing that as content designers and UX writers we have to always take into account because the position of this user could be anywhere doing anything. Another space that I was thinking about, like when you want to cancel subscriptions and things like that, right? That's another space of kind of trauma informed design because you don't know why this person needs to cancel. They may have lost their job. They may not be able to afford this anymore, or they may not like it anymore. It could be as simple as that.
Not just like put blocker after blocker after blocker. Oh, there's so many. At some point, I might need to do a bit of a case study on this because you could. I mean, you'd have to go and sign up to a load of services and then unsubscribe, right? But just to have a look at how different people do it, it's amazing the range. And this isn't about whether you're a big company or a little company. Adobe, the worst when you want to unsubscribe. It's so painful. They make me so angry. We'll keep throwing things at you. And then it's like, there's actually some real kind of dark UX in there that's not a good look, guys. Really not. And then you get like these lovely little independent apps that just do the process beautifully and ask for feedback and make you think like, maybe I don't want to unsubscribe, But you don't know what's going on in somebody else's life. That you don't need to be like that to them.
Well, for some products, they come from it was developer built it, boom, and now it's out. And then the UX came later. And we can kind of see that with the transformation when it comes to certain older products, I'd say. But with newer product spaces, like, for example, Slack. Slack has a lot of compassion and empathy in their content design, which we love, you guys. Whenever I read a Slack message, it's like, oh, that's really nice. I really like the way they said that.
They've got it. Yeah, they've got it on multiple levels. They've built it into the UI as well as in the microcopy and UX. Like the whole thing.
I think it was LinkedIn.
It's very smartly done.
They were calling out how there was a food delivery that was going from someplace to a hospital. And they were like, oh, we noticed this was at a hospital. We're sending love and care to those in need. Okay. And I'm like, oh, that's so thoughtful because, you never know what's going on. And sometimes when you're in the hospital, you're stuck in there, okay? You can't leave and you're praying to God for Uber Eats to come through. So It's just, you don't know if people are experiencing, okay, they don't want their hospital food. And sometimes, you might be waiting on someone to say their goodbyes. So you're just trying to stay there so that you're able to do that. So many different dynamics are
Mhm.
taking place. So I thought that was like really thoughtful.
Yeah, that's really nice. Yes. I don't know whether you've seen that. I had my appendix out over New Year. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, but it was a bit like that. The food was terrible.
Oh my gosh, see?
Yeah.
Mm, oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
that was a surprise New Year present for me. But yeah, anyway, that not to talk about that. But my point is, yes, exactly. You're making me think there about the food. The food is horrendous, and that's just a nice extra touch. Because basically, look, if somebody's in a hospital, then unless it's a new baby,
True.
it's generally not a good thing, right? So, and that's another example of
Yeah.
just you just don't know what's going on in other people's lives, and so it's better to just be kind to everybody, and that's a rule for life. But I think it applies in content design as well.
Simple for the users, monitoring the cognitive overload, like making sure we're not giving them too much information, but making sure we're also giving them enough information so that they can have that choice and control. And you mentioned different design elements that can be used, such as having like the Arcadian menu, just to give the users, I love the Arcadian menu on mobile, by the way, design. Okay, just so you know, okay, because I get to drop down and then, ooh, it's a paragraph, and then I get more information. But when I'm looking at it, I'm not like, oh my God, it's an essay. I can go specifically to where I
Yeah,
want to get the insight that I need to get. And it's super awesome. So I like that design.
and you don't have to read you don't
Right.
have to read the whole thing.
Right.
You just read the bit. You can if you want, but then that's your choice as well. But yeah, I appreciate that as well. It helps you just to kind of like focus on the one thing at a time. Calm, visually calm.
It's like a nice breadcrumb. So yeah, I totally love that, And
Yeah,
I feel like that also allows you to
yeah,
understand
yeah.
your survivors a bit more. Because when you're allowing them to interact with the app and have this choice and control, then they're letting you know what they're ready for. So, for example, when it comes to like your product and you have someone who's there for, I don't know, maybe a major move that was abrupt, their husband's job changed, they had to change countries, it was quick. Oh my God, I'm stressed out. It's cold here. So, they may be utilizing your product, and they're like, I don't know how I'm going to deal with this weather change. Everything is just stressing me out about this. But as they go through the products, after day 2, for example, they may feel like, you're right. It's not that bad when you put a coat on. It's actually, you get some hot tea, it's an experience. And I think that that's something that people need to pay attention to because it allows users to explore so much more and feel as though they're directing their path and not as though it's the reverse. And I think that that's very important.
Exactly. They're exploring at their own pace in their own way. And another thing that so we all know as content designers, as UX designers, people will skim a page. They're very rarely will they read every single word on it. And they tend to look at headings. So there was just as a side note for headings where, and actually this is a technique that I've used in the past and I will rethink it now. Sometimes you're putting yourself in the shoes of the user and you're thinking, what questions are they asking? But the problem is that when you phrase headings as a question, the key information is not at the beginning. The beginning of it is always the question part, the what, who, how, why. The key information is further along. You're not helping people skim by putting that there. So you're actually better to have just kind of like statement headings about what it is you're talking about. But anyway, one thing that I always say when you're working out the structure of a piece, and whether that's like a full guide that has several
Yeah.
sections and pages, or whether it's just like a one-page blog piece,
Mm-hmm.
is look at your headings. Do your headings tell a story? Does this make sense? The order in which you've got it. Because the number of times that I'm like, well, why is that all the way up there? It relates to this bit down here. You want it to kind of flow in a logical order and help
Okay.
people to zone in on the bits that are actually what they're looking for.
You're absolutely right about everything that you're saying. And I just see kind of what you were saying earlier with accessibility and it kind of being the same thing to a certain extent.
There's overlaps.
Absolutely.
There's obviously things that are different. There are considerations for accessibility that are not the same. Things to do with screen readers and color blindness and stuff, but there are so many kind of
Yeah.
emotional and cognitive things that really overlap. Yeah.
In every space, no matter our niche, whatever we're doing, cybersecurity, trauma-informed design, all these different areas that are developing for us. Because I keep thinking about this one thing. Like, I remember just being introduced to the world of design and the idea, like, one of the first books I read was Don't Make Me Think. And it's like, that's something that just kind of stuck. It's like design is not supposed to make you think. You're supposed to be able to make like just an automated decision. And when I think of content, I feel like it goes into that. So it's just supposed to be just like putting your hands into a glove type of thing. Not necessarily, you know what I mean? Like, it's just supposed to fit really smooth and it just goes together. And that sometimes one may stand out more than the other, but when they work together, such as like you were saying with the headings, telling a story and just guiding that user along the way. So much so that they don't even feel like, what am I supposed to be doing? They're just like, oh yeah, do, 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 do. And then they can move on to their next task or whatever it is that they want. I want to go ahead and bring this to a close because we've covered a lot of stuff. And I want to be respectful of your time because I know it's day for me and night for you.
It's all cool. All good.
If anyone wants to continue this conversation with you on trauma-informed design, how can they reach out?
Come and find me on LinkedIn. And DM me, reach out. I love having conversations with new people, learning new things. It all helps to kind of like spark ideas.
Same here.
I just want to keep learning for the rest of my life, basically.
Thank you so much, Joe, for being with me today and hanging out with me in this crazy world of defined design. And we learned so much insight from you on everything in trauma-informed design, thinking of our users outside of just using that specific product, considering their mindset. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Sometimes we only think about it when it's a sale involved, for example, or travel is involved. And it's in every situation, because even if it's Instagram and your pictures aren't loading and you're just sitting in the car, that's a problem. I feel like, yeah, if Instagram crashes, we'll hear about it. So that will definitely give somebody some trauma. But thanks so much for hanging out with me, Joe. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. I have loved it.
That was Joe Levy. Despite some technical challenges, we managed to have a meaningful discussion about trauma-informed design. I appreciate how we approach such a serious topic with a lighthearted perspective. During our conversation, we explored how trauma affects everyone, explored what it means to meet users where they are, and we took the time to recognize both major and minor forms of trauma. If you'd like to continue this conversation with Jo, her contact information can be found in the show notes. If you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to like and subscribe on the platform of your choice. This episode was written and produced by me, Janiessa Norice, while editing and post-production is done by Digital Sunflower. Until next time, turn your problems into opportunities.